In this podcast episode, Jordan B. Peterson delves deep into the psychological and ethical dimensions of human behavior, exploring why pursuing short-term pleasure often leads to long-term ruin. Drawing extensively from biblical stories and philosophical insights, he unpacks the nature of morality, the structure of human aim, and how our intentions shape perception and interaction. Peterson also critically examines the modern Western church, the importance of conscience, the distinction between discipline and tyranny, and the challenges posed by technology addiction. Peterson begins by asserting that every human action is inherently a moral decision, a choice between aiming upward toward what is good or downward toward what is harmful. Every glance, word, and movement embodies an ethical decision. He uses the metaphor of a chicken crossing the road to illustrate that choices are made in the hope of moving toward something better, not worse. Even perception is intertwined with action and morality. It is never passive, but directed by intention, which in turn reflects ethical orientation. This foundation establishes that human life is a continuous navigation of moral aims, and that our intent colors the reality we experience. Peterson explores the biblical figure Jacob as a symbolic representation of human potential for transformation. Beginning as a flawed and deceitful character, Jacob's journey illustrates the necessity of deciding to aim up, to orient oneself toward a higher, better goal despite personal imperfections. The act of sacrifice, exemplified by Jacob's burnt offering, represents the concrete commitment to change and the shedding of past flaws. This act is not merely ritualistic, but metaphorical for any personal transformation requiring sacrifice and reorientation toward the good. It emphasizes that growth demands leaving behind previous versions of oneself and continually climbing toward an ineffable ideal symbolized by Jacob's ladder. Peterson highlights that what constitutes the highest good or God is inherently beyond full human comprehension. This supra-concept recedes as one approaches it, ensuring that life remains a perpetual journey without a final endpoint. This endless ascent prevents stagnation and imbues human existence with meaning and adventure. The biblical God, therefore, is not a static entity, but a dynamic, transcendent ideal that continuously beckons humanity upward. This notion guarantees that moral and spiritual growth is an unending endeavor. Delving into the story of Elijah, Peterson presents conscience as the still, small voice that represents God's presence within humans. This voice is quiet, non-coercive, and requires attentive listening. It embodies an internal moral compass that one can choose to hear or ignore. The autonomy of conscience raises profound questions about self-governance, suggesting a part of the self is beyond direct control and points toward a transcendent moral order. Peterson argues that this internal voice functions biologically as an emotion and motivation system aligned with long-term social and personal well-being. Whether conceived spiritually or scientifically, conscience connects the individual to an overarching moral good. Peterson discusses human mating strategies to illustrate how biological imperatives align with ethical frameworks. Men tend to fall into short-term or long-term mating strategies, each with distinct personality traits and moral consequences. Short-term strategies are linked with darker personality traits like Machiavellianism, psychopathy, narcissism, and sadism, reflecting a self-serving and exploitative orientation. In contrast, long-term strategies emphasize commitment and responsibility, fostering social stability and ethical behavior. This binary demonstrates how aim shapes character and how violating deeper, long-term values triggers conscience and internal conflict. Using addiction as an example, Peterson explains that radical life changes, like overcoming alcoholism, require a crisis point where one recognizes responsibility for past errors and commits to aiming upward. This transformation is itself an act of faith. Faith in the possibility of change and in a better future that is unknown and risky. The sacrificial nature of this commitment demands leaving behind destructive habits and embracing prolonged effort toward growth. Religious conversion is presented as an empirical phenomenon that facilitates such change, aligning spiritual commitment with psychological transformation. Peterson recounts the biblical tale of Jonah to illustrate the duty individuals have to heed conscience and speak truth, even to enemies or in difficult circumstances. Jonah's initial flight from this call symbolizes the human tendency to avoid responsibility and the consequences that follow: chaos, danger, and personal descent into suffering, comparable to hell. Yet through his ordeal, Jonah realizes the importance of obedience to conscience and becomes a transformative figure whose sincere message spares an entire city from destruction. This narrative underscores that individual moral courage can alter the course of societies and that silence in the face of injustice imperils everyone. Peterson stresses that in contemporary times, characterized by rapid change and immense opportunity alongside potential catastrophe, listening to conscience and acting courageously is more urgent than ever. The decisions individuals make about speaking their truth or remaining silent have far-reaching consequences. He reinforces the idea that every person's unique perspective is valuable and necessary for the health of their family, community, and nation, urging listeners to embrace this responsibility despite fear or uncertainty. Addressing a question about the state of modern Western Christianity, Peterson admits the Church has many faults, as do individuals and societies. He cautions against arrogance and premature judgment, especially in youth, advocating instead for active engagement and repair rather than abandonment. Using the metaphor of inheriting a dilapidated house, he insists that faith communities are worth the effort of fixing, requiring honest dialogue and collaboration. His reflections call for humility, responsibility, and constructive action rather than cynicism or withdrawal. Peterson discusses how to distinguish between healthy discipline and oppressive self-tyranny. Drawing on biblical stories, particularly the episode where Moses is punished for striking the rock instead of speaking to it as commanded by God, he emphasizes the power of invitation over force. Discipline should be an enabling set of principles that encourage and motivate, not a punitive or coercive mechanism. Negotiation, mutual respect, and clarity of intent are paramount, whether dealing with oneself, partners, children, or citizens. This approach fosters enthusiasm and cooperation rather than resistance and rebellion. Responding to a question about the significance of Christ's cry on the cross, Peterson describes the Passion story as the ultimate tragedy, a comprehensive encounter with the full spectrum of human suffering and desolation. Christ's experience of abandonment and despair represents the depths of human pain. However, this moment is part of a larger narrative of resurrection and reconciliation, illustrating the acceptance and even welcoming of catastrophe as integral to spiritual maturation. The Passion thus symbolizes the possibility of transcending suffering through faith, voluntary acceptance, and engagement with life's darkest moments. Finally, Peterson addresses the modern challenge of phone addiction, paralleling it with the Tower of Babel story to highlight the dangers of worshiping technology as an end in itself. While technological advancement is a human achievement, it risks becoming a tyrannical master that fragments communication and community if allowed to dominate. Phones should serve as tools rather than masters, a difficult but essential boundary to maintain. Peterson reflects candidly on his own struggles with phone use in personal relationships, underscoring the importance of presence and negotiation in maintaining healthy connections. He warns that technological challenges will only intensify, necessitating ongoing awareness and conscientious usage.